We need it for world defence, he says, which kind of makes you wonder who we're defending the world from. But then again, when the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born, now is the time of monsters. Does Greenland have a price? Starmer says he will not yield on his principles that Greenlanders should have sovereignty, and he, of course, is right. But how much of a price do you want to pay for that principle? 10% tariff from next month? 25% from the summer? 30%? 35%? Does Greenland have a price? Should Greenland have a price? Is real estate actually realpolitik? Simon Marks is LBC's Washington correspondent. Simon, decode that.
Well, Tom, I think it's really important to underscore that while the headline writers are correctly all reporting that Donald Trump said that he doesn't want to use military force to seize Greenland, I'm not sure that's entirely the same as Donald Trump taking the military threat off the table, because no sooner had he said, I don't want to use force, than he immediately drew the attention of his audience in Davos to the fact that the United States has, he says, the most powerful military on the planet and is commissioning new battleships that he described in great detail that are going to be 100 times more powerful than those that were used during World War II. He even said to his audience there in Davos, just think about that. And I think he wanted them to think about that in a manner that connected the expression of might is right to the issue of Greenland. Now, he says that he wants immediate negotiations about acquiring the territory. That is very different than what his own Vice President and Secretary of State committed to last week in discussions with the Danish Foreign Minister and the Greenlandic Foreign Minister here in Washington. They agreed to set up a working group with the Danes and the Greenlandic authorities to see if any common ground was possible to identify between the US and Europe. They never agreed to set up a working group to talk about the process of acquisition. And the other extraordinary thing that really struck me, and there was so much of it in that speech, but you know, this claim by President Trump that Greenland is part of North America, it's our territory, this complete retelling of World War II history, that somehow Greenland was American at the end of World War II, and presumably either FDR or Harry Truman made the great mistake, presumably Harry Truman in his mind, of giving it back to the Danes. But this idea that it's our hemisphere, this is our territory, is an extraordinary assertion that European leaders are going to have to find a way of trying to disabuse him of.
It's also partially, of course, Simon, the same kind of argument that Putin would deploy about why it's necessary that Ukraine becomes Russian again.
Yeah, and it's interesting you raised Vladimir Putin, because Donald Trump keeps saying, and he said it again in this speech, that if the United States doesn't acquire Greenland or take it into America's aegis, the Russians and the Chinese are going to come in and they're going to seek to control Greenland. That despite the fact that the Danes say there hasn't been a single Chinese naval vessel spotted in the waters off Greenland in a decade. But what is so extraordinary about this is that Russia is egging him on. They're telling him they think it's a great idea for the United States to acquire Greenland. Now, why would Russia be doing that if they had territorial designs on this piece of ice? I mean, the other aspect of all of this, of course, were the not-so-veiled threats to the NATO alliance that was contained in this speech, which was also, in broader terms, a speech in which Donald Trump was urging Europeans to get behind political parties that are going to do for the UK, for France, for Germany, for countries all over the continent, exactly what he's done for the United States. And that comes back to the national security strategy and its thumbs up for patriotic European parties, by which, of course, in the UK, Donald Trump means reform.
Simon, appreciate it as always. Thank you so much. Simon Marks is LBC's Washington correspondent. 11 minutes past 4. Hilary Fordwich is president of Strelmark, a US-based business development consultancy firm. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme, Hilary. Just on the point about Greenland, is this Donald Taco, Donald Trump always chickens out?
Well, good afternoon, Tom. And I don't know if he chickens out. I do think anyone who's read Art of the Deal knows more that he does go in strong and ends, because he goes in with a strong stance, he ends up really getting what it is that he ended up wanting. In the end, ends up getting what he intended to in the first place in the end. I think that's more it. I wouldn't refer to it really as chickening out. And I do think all the peace agreements he's made weren't chickening out. I think what he's doing for the US economy isn't chickening out. What he's done for the price of oil isn't chickening out. And I don't think this is somewhere where he's going to really chicken out. I will say, after listening to Simon there, I will say I'd ask any British taxpayer, German taxpayer for that matter, French taxpayer, Swedish taxpayer, Norwegian taxpayer, how about you spend 2% of your GDP defending the US southern border? And they'd say, what? And can you imagine, Tom, you wanting your tax dollars to go to that? Tax pounds go to that? No. Whereas the American taxpayer has been mainly funding NATO. And I do think that one of the things President Trump is correct about is, if it was not for the US, probably, most of the UK would be doing the goose step now, and all of Europe. And, look at what's happened in the Second World War.
The US are pretty late in entering that. But anyway, Hilary, let's not relitigate that history. But listen, I think the argument about EU contribution to NATO is one that has been made by most US presidents for decades. It's just Trump is making it with the threat of leaving it.
Yeah, since Kennedy, that's what US presidents have been saying. They just didn't do it. Well, I don't think Obama mentioned it, but they really haven't done anything about it. So I think it has been consistent in terms of the US, and it has been pressure from the American taxpayer, who sort of, those that are aware of what's going on in the world, say, what on earth are we doing this for? And I think it is good that we're part of NATO. I think the US should spend money, and I think the US should contribute, but not more than a greater percentage than European nations. And yes, Simon was absolutely right, or somewhere else I heard that, obviously the US is a vast economy, so dollar-wise, actual funding-wise, we would always be giving more, but not percentage-wise, and that's the big issue. So I think President Trump has a lot of things that he's absolutely correct about.
On Europe and Britain broadly, he says that we are going in the wrong direction, that Europe is unrecognisable. What do you think he meant by that? I think I know what he meant by that.
Well, one of the things you can ask, Tom, why don't you ask every 45 minutes, a millionaire leaves the UK. Why don't you ask them what they think and why they're leaving? It's not just to do with taxes. It's probably to do with cultural norms, religious norms. I do know there's places where, obviously the amount of churches, which you don't seem to see in the mainstream media, that are burnt to the ground. I wonder who's burning those to the ground.
This is in France, I think, in the main, is it, Hilary? Because I've not heard of that in the UK.
Exactly, yes, and that hasn't been in the mainstream media. You're very well informed, Tom, yes. And then there's the Christmas markets that were throughout Germany and Austria that for the first time in centuries had to be actually shut down and or increased security. And then in France, the New Year's celebration had to be cancelled because of security concerns. If you're in your own country, if you're French or German or English or British, and you're in your own country and you can't have those traditions that you've had for centuries, that what he means is European traditions relevant to those countries can no longer take place. Now, I have no problem with whether it's diversity, different religions. Actually, I'm not a deeply religious person. I'm somewhat agnostic. I really don't care. You can be, I grew up in England with Catholics killing Protestants and Protestants killing Catholics. And in the US, I don't think a lot of Americans know that, the state of Maryland, where I live, was founded by Bloody Queen Mary, on the name of Bloody Queen Mary. And Virginia was named after Elizabeth I, the Protestant queen. There's been these religious strifes for years. I really don't mind what religion someone is, but in the Quran, it's one of the few religions where it says, stone the infidel, kill the infidel. I think when you have another religion and people come to your country that, one, don't want to assimilate, two, have a different religion that is belligerent, if not fatalistic, towards the native religion, I believe, and I'm not having a conversation with Donald Trump, but from what I read, that is what he's referring to. And no matter what nation you are, who wants to say, I want my culture, my country's religion, and my mode of living obliterated? I don't think so.
And you genuinely think that is being obliterated in the UK? Because from here, we have our problems, so does America, but I don't think it's being obliterated.
I don't know. I think where you've got your major cities where there is a Sharia court, eventually will there be Sharia law?
No.
Is that something that the average English person wants to live under? If you tell me the average English person wants to live under Sharia law, then you're right.
But common law is supreme to Sharia law. in every city in this country.
At the moment, the problem with democracy, as Winston Churchill said, is a democracy is not a good form of government. It's just better than everything else tried. Once you get a majority, Tom, of voters in the majority who say, no, we want to vote for Sharia law, it will be Sharia law, not just a Sharia court, Tom.